Hi friends, welcome to HEPGEC program brought to you by Gallant IAS. Throughout this session, you will be in touch with some previous year questions and model questions by which you will be able to familiarize the trend that UPSC is having in its preliminary questions. So, we are moving on to the first question from history. With whose permission did the English set up their first factory in Surat? So, it was in 1608 that Captain William Hawkins came to India with a letter from the King of England requesting permission to set up a factory in Surat. And in 1609, he reached the court of Jahangir, and Jahangir accepted all the gifts given by Hawkins. But unfortunately, Hawkins was not able to set up the factory in Surat in 1609 because of the opposition from Portuguese. So in 1611, Hawkins left India unable to counter the Portuguese. Alternatively, in 1611, a factory was set up in Masulipatam in the southeastern coast of India. And in 1612, it was under the leadership of Thomas Best that the Portuguese were defeated, and the Mughal Emperor Jahangir was very much impressed with the mighty navy that the English had, and in 1613, Jahangir granted the permission for setting up a factory in Surat. So here the answer is option B, Jahangir, who granted permission for the English to set up their first factory in Surat. Moving on to the second question from economy. Consider the following specific stages of demographic transition associated with economic development. 1. Low birth rate with low death rate. 2. High birth rate with high death rate. 3. High birth rate with low death rate. So, regarding demographic transition means the transition from high birth rate and high death rate to low birth rate and low death rate. And it is happening as a country is developing from the pre-industrial to an industrialized economic system. So, in the three stages, the first stage is both birth rate and death rate are high. And in the last stage, what happens is both birth rate and death rate are low. So if you know this two stages, then that means the first stage is high birth rate and high death rate. So 2 will be coming first. So if 2 is coming first, you can eliminate option A and D. So you are left with two options, B and C. And you know that in the last stage, it is low birth rate and low death rate. So low birth rate and low death rate is statement 1. So the last will be 1. So here in B it is 2, 1, 3, and in C it is 2, 3, 1. Yes. So C will be our answer. And the intermediate stages having high birth rate with low death rate. So here our answer is C, 2, 3, 1. Next question from Polity. The power of Supreme Court of India to decide disputes between the centre and state falls under its advisory jurisdiction, appellate jurisdiction, original jurisdiction, and the revisory jurisdiction. So jurisdiction means the authority given to a legal entity like court, where it can administer upon the justice within its limits of responsibility. So our Supreme Court is having different types of jurisdictions like exclusive jurisdiction, original jurisdiction, advisory jurisdiction, appellate jurisdiction, then revisory jurisdiction, etc. So regarding exclusive jurisdiction means a case will be specific or can be heard only in that particular court. So if a case can be heard in only Supreme Court, then that comes under the exclusive jurisdiction of Supreme Court. And original jurisdiction of Supreme Court is that original jurisdiction extends to those cases which are originating in the Supreme Court. And advisory jurisdiction, which is under Article 143, is that the President can request the Supreme Court to tender its advice on matters of law or fact whenever necessary. So that's coming under Article 143. Appellate jurisdiction means the Supreme Court can hear cases through appeals that are made against verdicts of the High Court. Revisory jurisdiction means the Supreme Court has the power to revise or review its own judgments that is made earlier or previous judgments or orders if it feels that any error or mistake has occurred in those orders or judgments. That is known as revisory jurisdiction. So here it's asking the power of Supreme Court to decide upon the disputes between the center and the states is coming under which jurisdiction? Actually, this is coming under the original jurisdiction where the Supreme Court has the power to decide upon disputes between the government of India and the states, and government of India and one or more states on one side and one or more states on the other side, and also between different states. So this is coming under the original jurisdiction of Supreme Court. So here the answer is option C. Question from geography. Quartzite is metamorphosed from. So metamorphic rocks. Metamorphic rocks are formed from existing rocks and through a process known as metamorphosis. And metamorphosis means change in form. Change in form. And this metamorphosis may happen due to pressure, heat or chemical activity. And here quartzite is metamorphosed from, actually it is metamorphosed from sandstone which is rich in quartz when it is exposed to pressure, heat or chemical activity. So here the answer is sandstone. The last question from environment. Consider the following statements. Biodiversity is normally greater in the lower latitudes as compared to higher latitudes. Second statement, along the mountain gradients, biodiversity is normally greater in the lower altitude compared to higher altitude. So regarding biodiversity and the factors influencing biodiversity, altitude and latitude are two among the factors which are influencing biodiversity. So we know that biodiversity is greater near the equator, and as we move towards the poles, biodiversity decreases. Decreases towards the poles. That means biodiversity is inversely proportional to latitude. And this phenomenon is known as latitudinal diversity gradient. So, according to this latitudinal diversity gradient, the lower latitudes will be having higher biodiversity and the higher latitudes will be having lower biodiversity. The same case is applicable to altitude also. Means as we move higher, what happens is that atmosphere is getting less denser. So what happens? Oxygen is less available and only a few species can survive in higher altitudes. So similarly, as we said in the case of latitudes, similarly in altitudes also, higher altitudes will be experiencing lower biodiversity and lower altitudes will be having higher biodiversity. So here both these statements are true. So our answer will be option C, both 1 and 2. So that's all for today. We are winding up today's session. See you soon.